sister had been missing for 5 years when I found her left arm bolted to a chair in a storage unit. I knew it was hers before I saw the tattoo. Kelly broke her wrist when she was 12. It healed badly because she took the cast off herself after 3 weeks and hid it under her bed. For the rest of her life, that wrist bent inward slightly. Our mother used to tell her it looked painful. Kelly would rotate it until the joint cracked and tell her it only hurt when people kept asking about it. The arm on the chair had the same bend. Then I saw the little blue moth tattooed below the elbow. One wing was larger than the other. I had been sitting beside Kelly in a stranger's kitchen when she got it at 17. Both of us drunk and trying not to laugh while the man worked with a machine he had bought online. Our mother grounded her for a month. I lied and said I had tried to stop her. I had spent 5 years imagining how I might recognize my sister's body. I had imagined her necklace, her teeth, the scar beneath her chin. I had imagined identifying a photograph in a police station while someone stood behind me with a box of tissues. I had never imagined finding one part of her attached to pieces of other women. The storage place was called North County Self Store, although it sat inside the city limits between a tire warehouse and an abandoned bottling plant. The building had once been used to make office furniture. It was a windowless brick block with 3 floors, 2 freight elevators and hallways that always smelled faintly of wet cardboard. I had been working there for 11 days. The job came through my friend Calvin. We had known each other since technical school. He managed foreclosures and cleanouts for the company that had recently purchased the building. When renters stopped paying and ignored the notices, we cut their locks, photographed the contents, and separated anything worth auctioning from what belonged in a dumpster. Most units were depressing rather than interesting. Water-damaged furniture, bags of children's clothing, old televisions, boxes of family photographs nobody wanted enough to pay $60 a month to keep. Unit 214 was supposed to be another clean-out. The renter was 4 months behind and had used a false telephone number. The name on the contract was Eric Shaw. According to Calvin, nobody by that name had responded to the certified letters. We reached the unit shortly after 9 on a Wednesday morning. Calvin cut the round lock with a grinder, while I held a plastic shield over the latch to stop sparks from hitting the boxes stacked across the hallway. The first strange thing was the second lock. It was mounted on the inside of the door. When Calvin raised the rolling shutter 6 inches, a chain caught and stopped it. Someone had installed a steel bracket behind the frame and secured the shutter from within. "Maybe he's sleeping in there," I said. People occasionally lived in the units. It was illegal and dangerous, but rent on a 10 by 15 space was cheaper than an apartment. Calvin lowered the shutter and called out. No answer. He called again, louder. Then he lay on the floor and shined his flashlight through the gap. I watched his expression change. "What?" I asked. "There's a table." "So?" "It's set." He handed me the light. I could see the legs of a wooden dining table and 2 chairs. White plates sat on the floor beside a pair of black shoes. Farther back, something hummed steadily. The air coming through the gap was cold. Calvin called the office and asked the maintenance man to bring bolt cutters. The man said he was unloading a truck and would be there in 20 minutes. Calvin did not want to wait. He used a pry bar to bend the bottom of the shutter until he could reach the chain with the grinder. I remember being irritated by the noise. I remember telling him that if the renter really was inside, we were about to scare him into having a heart attack. The chain dropped. Calvin rolled the shutter up. The unit had been lined with thick silver insulation. Extension cords ran along the ceiling to 2 portable air conditioners, the source of the humming. The floor was covered by a square of clean red carpet. There were curtains pinned to the concrete walls and a standing lamp in one corner. Somebody had tried to make the space resemble a living room. The table was set for 2. There were plates, wine glasses, and silverware. The glasses contained a dark liquid that had dried into a sticky film. A vase in the center held plastic flowers. A woman sat in the chair facing us. At first I thought she was a medical dummy. She wore a green dress with long sleeves, beige stockings, and black shoes. A blonde wig covered her head. A piece of lace had been draped over her face like a bridal veil. Her hands rested neatly beside her plate. The proportions were wrong. One shoulder sat higher. The left arm was longer than the right. Her knees did not line up beneath the dress. Calvin took 2 steps into the unit. "Hello?" The seated woman did not move. There was a smell beneath the cold air. Not the overwhelming smell people describe when they talk about dead bodies. It was sweet and chemical, with something rotten underneath. I told Calvin we should leave. He moved closer instead. "This is some art school shit," he said. He touched the woman's right hand. The finger bent beneath his. Calvin jerked backward and struck the table. One of the plates hit the floor and broke. I looked at the woman's hands properly for the first time. They were different sizes. The right hand was dark-skinned, narrow and delicate. The left was pale and broad, with short nails painted red. Fine wire had been looped around several knuckles to keep the fingers in position. A thick line of black stitching circled each wrist where the hands disappeared into the sleeves. Calvin began saying, "No," over and over. I should have left then. I should have called the police without touching anything. Instead, I walked around the table. The dress sleeve had ridden up on the woman's left arm. Beneath it, the skin was gray and waxy. There were small scars near the inner elbow, and a pale line where a bracelet or watch had protected the skin from the sun. Then I saw the wrist, then the moth. I do not remember crossing the space between us. One moment I was standing near the shutter. The next I was on my knees with Kelly's cold hand between mine. Her fingernails were gone. There were screw heads in the palm. I pulled at the arm as if I could remove it from the chair and take it home. The shoulder shifted beneath the dress with a dry, heavy movement. Something inside the torso knocked against the wooden frame. Calvin dragged me backward. I fought him. I accused him of hurting her. It took several seconds before I understood what I was saying. "That's Kelly," I told him. "That's my sister." Calvin stared at the tattoo. He had known Kelly. Everybody I grew up with had known her. He had helped us put up posters when she disappeared. He took out his phone, but there was no signal deep inside the building. He told me to go toward the elevators and call emergency services while he guarded the unit. I did not want to leave her. He pushed me into the hallway and promised he would not touch anything. I ran. There was no signal near the freight elevators either. I had to go through 2 fire doors and almost to the stairwell before my phone connected. The dispatcher made me repeat the address 3 times because I could not stop breathing hard enough to speak clearly. I told her there were human remains in a storage unit. Then I told her part of my sister was there. She ordered me to leave the building and wait outside. I said my friend was still inside. She told me not to go back for him. I went back anyway. The hallway was empty. The shutter to Unit 214 was fully open, but the lights inside had been switched off. Only the orange emergency lamps in the corridor remained. I called Calvin's name. Something scraped behind the wall. I turned on my flashlight and stepped inside. The chairs were still there. The woman was gone. The red carpet had been rolled halfway across the floor. Beneath it was a square opening cut through the rear wall. What I had assumed was solid concrete was 2 layers of painted plywood fixed over an old service doorway. A narrow passage continued into darkness behind the unit. Calvin lay on his stomach near the opening. There was blood on the back of his head and more beneath his face. A white electrical cord was wrapped twice around his neck. He was trying to pull air through it with a faint clicking sound. I loosened the cord and rolled him over. His lower lip had been split to the chin. 4 of his front teeth were missing. Later, the doctors determined that he had been struck with a framing hammer at least 3 times. 1 blow had fractured his skull behind the left ear. At the time, all I knew was that he was alive, and the person who had hurt him was close. I heard wheels rattling in the passage. I took Calvin's pry bar and went through the opening. The passage was part of the original factory. It ran behind 16 storage units and ended at an old loading area that was not shown on the building's public floor plan. The air was warmer there. Tire marks cut through the dust. About 40 feet ahead, someone was pushing a tall laundry cart toward an exit. I could see the blonde wig above the edge. Stop. The word came out weak. The person pushing the cart stopped. He was wearing gray coveralls and a plastic face shield. He looked over one shoulder, but the passage was too dark for me to see his face. I raised the pry bar. That's my sister. He left the cart and ran. I followed him through the loading bay. He kicked open a metal door and disappeared into the alley. By the time I reached it, a white cargo van was already turning past the bottling plant. The rear doors had not been closed properly. One swung open as the van hit a pothole. For a second, I saw the cart inside. The lace had fallen from the assembled woman's head. There was no face beneath it. The head was a smooth form wrapped in stained cloth. A row of human teeth had been pushed into a cut where the mouth should have been. Then the door swung shut. The police reached the storage building 7 minutes later. They found me kneeling beside Calvin with his blood on my hands and a pry bar on the floor. My first interview lasted 14 hours. By the end of it, I was no longer certain they believed there had ever been a body in the unit. There was blood, but most of it belonged to Calvin. There were partial fingerprints throughout the room, including mine on Kelly's arm, but no remains. The plates, glasses, furniture, and cooling equipment had been purchased with cash. The account had been opened using a stolen driver's license belonging to an Eric Shaw, who lived 200 miles away and had never heard of North County Self-Store. The camera covering the second-floor corridor had stopped recording 6 days earlier. The exterior camera caught the white van leaving, but mud covered the license plate. The driver wore a cap and kept his face turned away. Calvin could not identify him. He remembered something tightening around his neck from behind. Then he remembered waking while I was pulling the cord loose. The police found traces of blood from at least 7 people in the storage unit. None of it came from Kelly. For 3 days, they refused to tell my mother what I had seen. I had to tell her myself. She was sitting at the kitchen table when I did it. The table was the same one we had owned when Kelly was a child. My mother had refinished it twice rather than replace it because one corner still had Kelly's name carved underneath. Mom listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked, "Was she alone?" I did not understand. "Her arm," she said. "Was it by itself?" I told her no. Her face tightened, but she did not cry. What did they put her with? I tried to avoid answering. She made me describe the chair, the dress, the hands. She asked whether the rest of the body belonged to one person or several. When I told her the truth, she stood up, walked to the sink, and vomited. Afterward, she washed her mouth and asked for the detective's number. My mother's name is Ruth. She was 61 then. She had cleaned rooms at St. Agnes Hospital for 27 years and raised 2 children after our father left. She had arthritis in both hands, a replaced knee, and a habit of apologizing whenever she needed help carrying groceries. People often mistook that for weakness. The detective assigned to Kelly's case after the storage unit was a woman named Lena Ortiz. She had worked the original disappearance as a patrol officer. She remembered our mother standing outside the station every morning during the first week, waiting for someone to give her an update. Ortiz reopened everything. Kelly had been 23 when she disappeared. She left the bar where she worked shortly after 1 in the morning and was seen on camera walking toward the employee parking lot. Her car remained there. Her purse was found in a storm drain 6 blocks away 2 days later. There had been no useful witnesses. That was what we had been told. In the reopened file, Ortiz found a statement that had never seemed important. A man delivering cleaning supplies had reported seeing a white van behind the bar. He could not remember the plate, but he recalled a blue medical services logo on the side. Ortiz began looking for people connected to medical transport, funeral services, and hospital maintenance. Whoever had built the woman in the storage unit understood enough about preservation to slow decomposition. Not expertly, according to the forensic technicians, but enough to keep skin and tissue intact for years. She also compared the unidentified blood from the unit against missing person cases. The first match came 4 days later. Her name was Tanisha Reed. She had disappeared after leaving a bus station 18 months earlier. She was 29, a pharmacy technician, and the mother of a 6-year-old boy. Blood from Tanisha had been found along the inner cuff of the green dress. The second match belonged to Maribel Santos, who vanished while walking home from a late shift at a bakery. The third belonged to a 17-year-old named Paige Fuller. The news spread before police could contact every family. Reporters gathered outside the storage building. They called the person responsible the mannequin killer, then the collector, then the North County butcher. My mother hated all 3 names. "He has a name," she told a reporter who pushed a microphone toward her. "Use it when you find him. Don't make him into something bigger than a man." The reporters made the storage unit sound more elaborate than it was. They spoke about a chamber and a human sculpture. One station had an artist draw a pale, perfect woman seated beneath candlelight. It looked like the poster for a film. What Calvin and I found was not perfect. It was badly made. The stitches were uneven. Foam showed through gaps in the skin. The shoes had been cut at the heels because the feet did not fit. Whoever assembled it had not created anything beautiful. He had fastened pieces of dead women to lumber and dressed the result. Calling it art gave him too much. The reality was closer to something a lonely child might build from broken dolls, except every broken piece had once belonged to a person who wanted to live. Detective Ortiz showed us a chart of the blood matches, only because my mother refused to leave the station without understanding what had been found. 7 circles had been printed across a drawing of the storage unit. Each circle marked a separate DNA profile. 3 now had names. 4 did not. The blood did not indicate that all 7 women had been killed there. Most traces were tiny. A smear inside a sleeve, a drop beneath the carpet, stained material caught in the teeth of a handsaw recovered from a toolbox. Someone had worked on the body in other locations and brought the pieces to the unit. That explained why the police had never connected the disappearances. There was no single dumping ground, no repeated method visible to an investigator. Some women had vanished from parking lots. Others disappeared near their homes. One had supposedly boarded an interstate bus. The killer took what he wanted and disposed of everything else in different places. To him, the body part was not evidence left behind. It was the trophy. Calvin remembered one additional detail after he woke fully. He said he had been standing outside Unit 214 when he heard the sound of the air conditioners change. One stopped humming. He stepped inside to check whether I had unplugged something. Then a man behind him said, "You weren't invited." Calvin turned just before the hammer struck. The voice bothered him more than the attack. There had been no panic in it, no anger at being discovered. The man sounded mildly disappointed, as though Calvin had arrived early for a dinner party. Calvin's wife asked me not to visit him again. She did not blame me directly, but she did not need to. I saw it in the way she stood between his hospital bed and me. Calvin had taken the job because I needed money. He had stayed beside the unit because I asked him not to leave Kelly alone. He would require months of therapy to walk normally. He had headaches that left him unable to speak. One pupil remained larger than the other. Every person Martin touched created another circle of damage around the person he actually attacked. He understood that. It was why he kept the photographs of vigils. 4 nights after the discovery, somebody pushed an envelope through my mother's mail slot. There was no stamp or address. Inside was one of our missing person posters for Kelly. It had been folded into a narrow strip. Someone had cut out Kelly's photograph and replaced it with a picture of the faceless woman from the storage unit. On the back, a sentence had been written in blue ink. "You gave up before she did." My mother found it at 6 in the morning. She called the police before she called me. That was how I knew she was frightened. Officers searched the yard and spoke to neighbors. A camera across the street had captured a person in a hood walking past shortly after 3, but the image was useless. Ortiz wanted Mom moved to a hotel. Mom refused. "My daughter was taken from a parking lot," she said. "Should I stop going near parking lots too?" Ortiz explained that the person responsible now knew where she lived. He knew 5 years ago. There was no arguing with that. Mom allowed them to install cameras and accepted a panic button. I changed every lock, removed the ceramic bird from the back steps, and slept on her sofa for the next 3 nights. At 2 in the morning, I would find her in Kelly's old room. Nothing had been preserved exactly as Kelly left it. Mom was not one of those parents who kept a missing child's room as a shrine. She had donated most of the clothes after the 3rd year and turned the room into a place for sewing. But several things remained. Kelly's high school yearbooks, a broken jewelry box, a row of paper stars she had taped above the window. Mom sat on the floor beneath those stars and looked through photographs she had already seen thousands of times. On the third night, she asked whether Kelly's arm had looked hurt. I said I did not know. Was she cut? Mom, I need the truth. I told her about the stitches at the shoulder and the missing fingernails. I did not tell her about the screws in Kelly's palm. Mom closed the album. She hated having her nails cut too short, she said. It was such an ordinary fact that it broke me more completely than the storage unit had. I went into the bathroom and cried with the faucet running. I pressed a towel against my mouth because I did not want my mother to hear. She heard anyway. She stood outside the door until I let her in. Then she held the back of my head the way she had when I was a child. Neither of us said that Kelly was dead. We still had not heard it from anyone official. Some part of us had spent 5 years protecting that final, unreasonable possibility. Kelly might have left. Kelly might have been trafficked. Kelly might have lost her memory. Kelly might still walk through the front door angry that we had touched her things. An arm in a storage unit ended all of that. There are forms of hope that become cruel if you keep them long enough. The video was shown that evening. It was the first time I saw Martin Vale's face in 5 years. He stood behind my mother in footage from one of Kelly's vigils. Thin, pale, wearing wire-framed glasses and a yellow volunteer vest. He was holding a stack of posters against his chest. Martin had joined the searches on the second day. He said he had seen Kelly's photograph online and wanted to help. He brought coffee. He owned a van and drove volunteers between search areas. When it rained, he gave my mother his coat. He helped me tape posters to telephone poles and listened while I blamed myself for not picking Kelly up after work. He was quiet and awkward. People talked over him. Sometimes he stood too close. I remembered feeling sorry for him. He stayed involved for nearly 2 months. Then he stopped answering messages, and we forgot him. Ortiz did not identify him from the vigil footage. My mother did. She paused the recording and pointed. That one. I asked how she could be sure. She said that during the searches, Martin had asked whether Kelly had any marks that might help identify her. Mom mentioned the scar beneath Kelly's chin. Martin had asked if she had tattoos. Our mother told him about the moth. At the time, it sounded like a normal question from someone helping search for a body. Martin Vale had worked for a company that transported medical equipment between hospitals and private clinics. Their vans were white with a blue logo. He had been dismissed 6 years earlier after several clients complained that he entered restricted rooms without permission. After that, he repaired refrigeration systems. North County Self-Store had hired him twice to service cooling units before the building changed owners. He knew the hidden service passages. Police went to his last registered address. He had moved out 8 months earlier. The landlord said he left the apartment clean except for a section of bedroom wall covered with photographs of women cut from newspapers and catalogs. They searched the garage he had rented across town. It was empty. The floor had been bleached so aggressively that the concrete had turned white. Martin had been planning to disappear long before Calvin cut the lock. The detectives found one thing inside an air vent, a memory card wrapped in plastic. It held 47 photographs. The first 12 showed the artificial woman being assembled over several years. In the earliest, she was only a padded wooden frame lying on a workbench. Later images showed a torso wrapped in foam, one leg, then the other. Each edition had been photographed beneath bright work lights from several angles. There were pictures of the victims alive. Some had been taken from a distance: women at work, women entering apartments, women loading shopping into their cars. Others had been taken after they were restrained. Ortiz would not let me see most of them. She did show me the photograph of Kelly. My sister was sitting on a bare floor with her hands tied in front of her. There was blood on her blouse and one eye was swollen. She looked directly at the camera. She was holding up her middle finger. That was Kelly. Even terrified, even hurt, she had refused to give him what he wanted. The next photograph showed only her left arm on a stainless steel table. I threw the detective's tablet across the interview room. Ortiz did not arrest me or tell me to calm down. She retrieved it, checked that the screen had not cracked, and waited until I could breathe again. "Why that part?" I asked. She said they did not know. I knew. Martin had asked my mother what she loved most about Kelly. Mom told him Kelly had the strongest hands of anyone she knew. Kelly could open jars, move furniture, and fix things that the rest of us threw away. He had listened to us describe her as if he cared. He had been choosing. The memory card also contained recordings. Martin spoke to the unfinished body as though it were a person. He called it Elise. He asked whether she had missed him. He described his day and complained about co-workers, neighbors, and women who had rejected him. His voice was soft and patient. In one recording, a woman cried somewhere outside the camera frame. Martin looked toward the sound and smiled. "Don't be rude," he told her. "We're having dinner." That smile destroyed the comforting lie that he was simply delusional. Whatever he believed about Elise, he understood suffering. He recognized fear. He enjoyed causing it. The police asked my mother and me to stay quiet about Martin's identity while they searched properties connected to him. His photograph appeared online anyway. Someone at the medical transport company sold an old employee picture to a news station. By the following morning, his narrow face was on every local channel. Former co-workers gave interviews. One called him harmless. Another said he had always known something was wrong with Martin, but could not provide a single example. Women began reporting that he had followed them. A nurse remembered finding him in the staff changing room at a rehabilitation clinic. A former neighbor said her underwear disappeared from a shared laundry room. A woman he met through a church social group had obtained a restraining order after he sent her photographs of herself sleeping. None of it had followed him from one town to the next. He lost a job. He changed his name on an application. He moved. Each person knew one ugly piece, but nobody saw the whole man. Ortiz believed public attention would make him reckless. She was right. He called me shortly before midnight. The number on my screen belonged to Kelly. I was sitting in my mother's living room with an officer parked outside. I stared at the name until the telephone nearly stopped ringing. Then I answered. At first I heard only static. "Kelly?" I knew it would not be her. I said her name anyway. A man breathed into the receiver. "Nathan." I recognized Martin's voice from the recordings. Every part of me wanted to shout. Ortiz had warned me that he might make contact. She told me to keep him speaking and signal the officer without letting Martin know. I walked toward the front window and switched the porch light on and off. "Where is my sister?" "You found her." "I found her arm." That was the best part. He said it with the same calm tone someone might use to compliment a photograph. I asked where he had taken the rest of the body from the unit. Elise isn't a body. She's 11 dead women tied to wood. The line remained quiet for several seconds. I thought he had disconnected. Then a woman screamed. The sound was distant and distorted, but I knew the voice. The scream broke into coughing. A man told her to raise her arm again. Kelly said, "Go fuck yourself." I sat down on the floor. Martin was playing a recording. I heard a slap. Kelly cried out. Then Martin's recorded voice asked her whom she wanted him to call. My brother. My hand tightened around the phone. What should I tell him? Kelly breathed hard for several seconds. Tell him this isn't his fault. Martin stopped the recording. I could not speak. He had kept that sentence for 5 years. He knew exactly what it would do to me. He had probably imagined the moment every time he saw me at a vigil, or watched me staple another poster to a pole. She was thinking about you, he said. The officer outside was already speaking into his radio. Ortiz called my mother's phone and silently instructed me through text to keep Martin on the line. Did you kill her that night? She wouldn't cooperate. Is that a yes? She damaged something that belonged to me. She belonged to herself. Martin laughed once. It was not loud or unstable. It sounded private, as though I had said something naive. That was her problem. I asked why he had joined the searches. Your mother asked me to. You volunteered. She needed me. All of you did. He began listing things my mother had told him. Kelly's favorite food. The park where she broke her wrist. The song our father played during long drives. He repeated our memories as if learning them had made him part of the family. Then he said something that turned my stomach. Ruth has a beautiful face when she's grieving. I stopped thinking about keeping him on the line. I told him if he went near my mother, I would kill him. That's what Kelly said. He disconnected. Police traced the call to a phone left on a city bus. The device had been taped beneath a seat, already connected to an automated program that played Martin's side of the conversation. Some of his responses had been recordings triggered remotely. Others had been selected in advance. He had not simply called to speak with me. He had built another little scene and forced me to perform in it. Ortiz took my phone as evidence. For the rest of the night, I sat at my mother's kitchen table while technicians copied the recording. Mom listened from the hallway. I had tried to keep her from hearing Kelly's voice, but she caught the final sentence before Martin stopped it. Tell him this isn't his fault. At sunrise, Mom placed a cup of coffee in front of me. She knew you, she said. I looked at her. Kelly knew what you would do to yourself. I should have picked her up. You couldn't drive. I should have found a way. And I should have made her take the car that morning. And the bartender should have walked her outside. And the police should have listened to the delivery driver. We can build a chain all the way back to the day she was born if we want. Mom sat opposite me. He took her, put that part where it belongs. 5 days after police released Martin's name to the public, I received a text from Kelly's old telephone number. The number had been disconnected for years. The message contained a photograph. My mother was asleep in her bed. The artificial woman sat in a chair beside her, one mismatched hand resting on the blanket. The cloth wrapping had been removed from its head. It still had no face. Under the photograph, Martin had written, "She likes your mother." I called Mom before I called the police. Her phone rang in the photograph. I could see its screen glowing on the bedside table. She did not move. I was already driving when Ortiz called me back. She ordered me to stop and wait for officers. I told her I was 5 minutes from the house. I reached it in 3. The front door was open. There was no sign of forced entry. Mom's spare key was missing from the ceramic bird beside the back steps, a hiding place she had used since we were children despite both Kelly and me telling her to stop. The bedroom smelled like chemicals. Her blankets were pulled back. One slipper lay near the door, and the other was in the hallway. There was a small smear of blood on the bathroom sink. The chair and the assembled woman were gone. Martin had taken the photograph before sending it. Police later estimated he had been inside the house for less than 4 minutes. He had entered while Mom was sleeping, injected her with an animal sedative, and arranged the body beside her. Then he waited long enough to take the picture. That detail mattered. He could have taken my mother quickly and left. Instead, he risked being caught because he wanted me to see that he could sit beside her bed. He wanted me to imagine him touching her while she slept. Sadism was not something doctors added to his description after his death. It was in everything he did. Mom's phone was still in the house, but her watch was gone. It was an old fitness watch Kelly had bought her for Christmas. It did not have cellular service, but it connected automatically to known wireless networks. The police checked every network it had used. At 10:42 that night, nearly 6 hours after the abduction, the watch briefly connected to a public router belonging to Harrow Paperworks. The factory had closed 11 years earlier. It stood beside the river on the northern edge of the industrial district. 6 stories of rusted steel, broken windows, and concrete towers. Part of it had been converted into cheap workshops. The rest was condemned. Martin had rented a ground floor unit there under another false name. Ortiz told me not to go. By then, I was already on the expressway. I am not proud of that. Police had trained people moving toward the location. They had weapons, protective equipment, and a plan. I had a tire iron on the passenger seat, and no idea where inside a 20-acre factory my mother might be. But I had already waited once. The night Kelly disappeared, she called me at 12:40 and asked for a ride. I told her I had been drinking and could not drive. She said she would walk. I could have paid for a taxi. I could have called our mother. I could have stayed on the phone until she reached her car. Instead, I told her I would see her the next day. For 5 years, I had lived inside those 6 words. I was not going to sit in another room while someone I loved disappeared. Harrow Paperworks was surrounded by a chain-link fence, but the vehicle gate had been cut open. I drove through and followed fresh tire tracks between the buildings. The white van was parked inside a loading hall. Both rear doors stood open. The laundry cart was empty. I called Ortiz and gave her the building number painted above the entrance. She told me officers were less than 4 minutes away. I heard my mother scream. It came from somewhere above me. I entered the factory. The loading hall opened into the old production building. Rusted machines filled the lower floor. Metal walkways crossed the space at different heights, connecting platforms and staircases. Sections of railing were missing. Torn strips of insulation hung from the roof. Work lights had been mounted along one stairwell. I followed them. On the second floor, I found a black shoe that did not belong to my mother. On the third, I found the green dress ripped from shoulder to waist. The artificial body was being disassembled as Martin moved it. Pieces had been laid out like markers leading me upward. A leg rested on the fourth floor landing. It had belonged to Paige Fuller. Her family had spent 2 years asking strangers online to share her photograph. I had seen her smiling face on television 3 days earlier. Now one of her legs lay on dirty concrete with a metal rod protruding from the hip. There was no dignity in it, no perfect woman, no love, just a dead child cut into something that had pleased him. I covered her with the torn dress and kept climbing. The 5th floor had once held the paper drying equipment. Most of the machinery had been removed, leaving an open chamber 4 stories high. Catwalks crossed above deep concrete vats. A steel staircase climbed to a maintenance platform beneath the roof. Martin had built his room on that platform. Plastic sheets hung from pipes, creating walls. Bright surgical lamps shone through them. I could see 2 figures moving inside. One was my mother. The other was a tall man leaning over her. Mom screamed again. This time the scream ended in a wet, choking sound. I ran up the stairs. Martin stepped through the plastic before I reached the platform. He was smaller than I remembered, about my height but thin, with narrow shoulders and gray hair hanging across his forehead. A bandage covered one side of his face. He wore a rubber apron over his clothes. There was blood on both hands. He held a scalpel. "Nathan," he said. Nobody called me Nathan except my mother. I swung the tire iron. He moved backward, and it struck the railing. The impact jarred my hands. He slashed at my face. The blade opened the skin from my left ear to my jaw. I did not feel it until later. I drove my shoulder into him. We hit the plastic wall and went through it together. The room behind it looked like the storage unit, only larger. The same red carpet covered part of the platform. There was another dining table, another standing lamp, another vase of plastic flowers. Elise sat at the table. Martin had removed both legs and one arm for transport. The remaining pieces were fixed to the wooden torso. Kelly's arm was still attached. Her tattoo faced upward beneath the light. The head now had hair, long gray hair, my mother's hair. Martin had cut it from her while she was unconscious and pinned it to the cloth scalp in uneven clumps. Mom lay behind the table. Her wrists had been secured to a metal chair with plastic ties, but one hand was free. The skin around that wrist had been stripped raw from twisting against the restraint. Her face was covered in blood. A cut began near her left temple and ran across her cheek toward the corner of her mouth. A second cut curved beneath her chin. Martin had marked the outline he intended to follow before removing her face. He had already started. The left side of her upper lip hung loose. Part of her cheek had been lifted away from the tissue beneath it. Her right eye was swollen shut. She was still kicking him. That was why his face was bandaged. While tied to the chair, half sedated and bleeding, my mother had torn loose one hand, grabbed a metal instrument from his tray, and driven it into the flesh below his eye. He had punched her until 2 bones in her face broke. She had headbutted him hard enough to split the bridge of his nose. He had knocked her down. She stood again. The police later reconstructed at least 23 minutes of that struggle from blood patterns and damage inside the room. Mom had dragged the chair 6 feet with one arm still attached. She had overturned his instrument cart, kicked away the syringes he tried to reach, and bitten through the web of skin between his thumb and index finger. Martin was an adult man, younger and physically stronger. My mother was 61, drugged and had one functioning knee. She did not overpower him. She denied him enough time to kill her. That was the only reason either of us reached her alive. Martin and I fell against the table. It collapsed beneath us. Plates shattered. The artificial body rolled sideways. Kelly's hand struck the floor. Martin made a sound I had not heard when I hit him. It was louder than pain. He scrambled toward the arm and tried to lift it from the broken frame. I kicked him in the ribs. He turned and buried the scalpel in my thigh. The blade went into the handle. My legs stopped supporting me. I fell near my mother's chair while Martin pulled Kelly's arm against his chest. "Look what you did," he said. He was crying. Not because of my mother. Not because of Kelly or the other people he had cut apart. He was crying over the thing he had built. Mom reached for the tray with her free hand. Her fingers closed around a pair of long scissors. Martin saw her move. He dropped Kelly's arm and kicked my mother in the face. The chair tipped backward. Her head struck the steel floor. She went still. Something in me disappeared then. I pulled the scalpel from my leg and came at him with it. I do not remember deciding to do that. I remember his expression changing. I remember him running through the torn plastic toward the catwalk. He moved quickly despite the blood in his eye. I followed, dragging my injured leg. Sirens sounded outside. Martin heard them too. He climbed the narrow maintenance stairs toward the roof. I went after him. The stairs ended at a catwalk suspended above the drying chamber. It was close to 60 feet above the concrete floor. A corroded railing ran along one side. On the other, there was nothing but a series of pipes and the open drop. Martin stopped halfway across. He had nowhere else to go. Below us, doors slammed and men shouted. Flashlights moved through the factory. I held the bloody scalpel in front of me. Where is the rest of her? Martin leaned against the railing. Blood ran from the bandage beneath his eye. Safe. Where? You wouldn't understand. I stepped closer. Try me. He looked down at the police entering the chamber. Then he smiled. It was the same small smile from the recording. She screamed for you, he said. I stopped. Kelly, at the end, she kept saying your name. He wanted me to charge him. He wanted one last reaction he could control. Before I could give it to him, my mother spoke behind me. You're lying. She stood at the top of the stairs. Her face was so covered in blood that I could barely see her features. She held the broken instrument tray against her body with both hands. One wrist still had a strip of plastic hanging from it. I told her not to move. Martin stared at her. For the first time that night, he looked frightened. She had not stayed down. He stepped away from the railing and rushed me. We struck each other at the same time. His shoulder hit my chest. The scalpel cut across his upper arm. We went into the railing hard enough to make it bend outward. Martin hooked his fingers into the wound on my thigh. My leg folded. He shoved me toward the open side of the catwalk. Mom swung the steel tray. The corner caught him behind the ear. He stumbled. His hands closed around the corroded railing. For half a second, it held. Then the bolts tore from the floor. Martin fell backward with the railing in his hands. He did not scream on the way down. The old drying machines had been stripped from the chamber, but a section of the cutting assembly remained beneath the catwalk. A long piece of sharpened steel angled upward from the frame. Martin hit it across the neck. His body continued falling. His head did not. It struck the side of the machine, rolled across a sheet metal panel, and dropped into the concrete vat below. His body landed several feet away, with a sound I still hear when I wake suddenly. The entire factory went quiet. Then the police reached us. Mom collapsed before they finished cutting the tie from her wrist. She survived. The surgeons worked on her for 14 hours that first night. Martin had severed nerves in her cheek and cut through the muscles around her mouth. Her left cheekbone and the floor of her eye socket were fractured. Part of her lip could not be saved. She had 6 more operations over the following 2 years. The left side of her face is permanently deformed. Her mouth pulls downward when she is tired, and she can no longer close her left eye completely. People stare at her in grocery stores. Children sometimes ask what happened. She tells them a bad man tried to hurt her and failed. The search of Harrow Paperworks lasted nearly 3 weeks. Police recovered the dismantled remains of 11 women. Martin had stored unused body parts in sealed drums and industrial freezers hidden in the basement. Some victims could only be identified through DNA or dental records. They found most of Kelly. Martin had buried her torso and remaining limbs in a lime pit beneath a poured concrete slab. His recordings showed where. There was enough left for the medical examiner to return her to us. Kelly received a proper funeral 5 years and 7 months after she disappeared. Her coffin remained closed. Mom chose the green dress Kelly had worn to our cousin's wedding. We placed her leather jacket in the coffin because she had loved it, and because Mom said she had been cold long enough. More than 200 people came. Tanisha Reed's mother sat beside mine. Paige Fuller's father stood at the back because he could not bear to look at another young woman's coffin. Calvin attended with a cane and a scar running behind his ear. He had lost 4 teeth and some hearing, but returned to work months later. When the service ended, my mother placed her hand on the coffin. The scars around her wrist were still purple. She told Kelly she was sorry it had taken so long to bring her home. Police learned more about Martin after his death than anyone had known while he was alive. He had spent part of his childhood in foster care after his father beat him, and his mother abandoned the family. School records described years of severe bullying. Other children mocked his speech, his clothes, and the tremor in his hands. He was expelled twice for attacking students who humiliated him. At 19, he was hospitalized after breaking into a classmate's apartment and waiting in her bedroom. He insisted they were in love, even though she had spoken to him only a few times. Over the years, different doctors diagnosed him with schizoaffective disorder, persistent delusions, severe antisocial personality traits, and sexual sadism. One forensic psychiatrist later said Martin scored extremely high on the traits commonly associated with psychopathy, although psychopathy itself was not the official diagnosis written in his records. He stopped treatment whenever he was released. He was fired repeatedly. Landlords evicted him. Women rejected him. Friends stopped answering his calls after he became possessive or threatening. In the notebooks found at the factory, He described all of this as society casting him out. He wrote that the world had denied him love. Elise was supposed to be his answer. He would build someone who could not laugh at him, leave him, reject him, or choose another man. He selected each victim for a feature he considered perfect. Tanisha's hands, Paige's legs, Maribel's teeth, Kelly's arm. In his mind, combining them would create a woman better than any of them had been separately. That was the story he told himself. It was not the whole truth. Martin kept audio recordings of the murders. He cataloged the victims' pleading. He wrote down which threats made them cry and which injuries made them stop resisting. He photographed their families at vigils. He attended memorials and listened while parents described the children he had taken from them. He did not do that because he was lonely. He did it because their grief excited him. He sent me the picture of the constructed body beside my sleeping mother for the same reason. He knew I would understand what he planned to take from her. He wanted to force me to imagine it before he did it. His illness shaped his delusions. His childhood explained some of his anger. Years of rejection fed the story in which he was an innocent man punished by a cruel world. None of it made him cut Kelly apart. Plenty of sick, lonely, and bullied people never hurt anyone. Martin chose to turn his pain into permission. He chose to enjoy it. The police returned Kelly's arm last. It had to be examined separately because it was the only part of her Martin had preserved. The medical examiner found fractures in 2 fingers that occurred shortly before her death. There was damage around the wrist consistent with restraints. Beneath what remained of 1 fingernail, they recovered a trace of old tissue. The DNA belonged to Martin. Kelly had scratched him. The detective believed that was why he removed her fingernails and why he kept the arm. It had fought him. He could not tolerate that. So he made it sit obediently at his table for 5 years. My mother heard this after the funeral. She was quiet for a long time. Then the damaged side of her mouth lifted as far as it could. "Good," she said. "I hope she hurt him." There is a photograph from Kelly's funeral on Mom's mantle now. It shows the 2 of us beside the grave after everyone else had left. My mother's face is bandaged. I am leaning on crutches. Neither of us looks relieved. People assume finding Kelly ended something for us. It did not. We got a grave instead of a missing person poster. We got a date of death. We got boxes of evidence and a detective who could finally tell us she was not coming home. Those things matter, but they are not peace. Sometimes I still see the storage unit when I close my eyes. The table set for 2. The plastic flowers. My sister's hand lying politely beside an empty plate. What stays with my mother is different. She remembers Martin standing over her and explaining how carefully he would remove her face. She remembers him saying the face was the most important part, because it was the first thing a man saw when the woman he loved looked back at him. Mom told him nobody had ever looked at him with love because there was nothing inside him worth loving. That was when he began cutting. He expected her to beg after that. Instead, she tore her wrist open, getting free. The surgeons could repair only part of what he did to her face. They could not give her back the way strangers once looked at her. They could not make eating painless or stop her eye from watering in cold weather. But Martin never got to finish. He never got her face. He never finished Elise. And the last complete thing he saw before he fell was the woman he had tried to reduce to skin standing in front of him again.